So let's talk about, you have 3 books in your series, and you started out with Parker Plum and the Rotten Egg Thoughts. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Parker Plum and the Rotten Egg Thoughts starts off with Parker waking up and finding a small egg on his pillow. And in true Parker form, he just kind of shoves it in his pocket, forgets about it, and goes about his day. And during the day, he experiences a series of kind of disappointments. And he notices that as, his thinking becomes more negative and self-defeating, the egg seems to be growing larger and larger until it kind of gets out of hand and takes over the entire school. So in the story, Parker needs to learn how to see the good in a bad situation and change his attitude for the better.
And he gets a little help from is it Mrs. Butter?
Mrs. Butterbot, yes, the lunch lady. Yeah, so I thought it would be really awesome to have a great lunch lady kind of save the day. And so Mrs. Butterbot definitely steps in and helps Parker to scramble his negative thoughts and turn his day around.
Yeah, and he learns that lesson of being able to. I love that analogy. She came out with her little whisk, and she's ready to scramble those eggs, and that is a good way of changing your perspective and learning that lesson. And it was so interesting to follow him through his day as those things happened, and that egg began to grow and continue to grow. And then by the time he got to the lunch, it was taking over the school. It's really fun, and it's so much of the imagination and where it was I found myself thinking more about, knowing we were going to talk, and I was thinking about, that rotten egg thoughts. I'm having some rotten egg thoughts, and figuring out a way to re-scramble them and make them into something more useful.
Right. And I think everybody has bad days or disappointing days. And, it's a useful skill for both adults and children to learn how to get through these disappointing times and keep going, to have that resilience.
Yes, absolutely. And such a imaginative way, because I kept thinking of the fantasy and the imagination of it really helped to, I think, create a better understanding of a very difficult topic for kids, of where it's hard to think about that, how to change your perspective and how to, look on the bright side. I mean, that's a hard concept for a lot of kids as they're growing up to understand. And so adding that fantasy and imagination to it really helped.
And that's my hope. I hope that, they remember like the big crazy egg, and when they're having a disappointing day, they go, oh, wait a second. There was that book we read about the egg. Maybe I could try some of those strategies.
Yeah, and it added a little humor to it too. So that's a lot easier to learn a lesson and internalize a lesson when you can draw that connection between the funny things that happen in the story. And you think about, some of the principles of learning too, of having those things that stick with you. And definitely that gigantic, bruised, stinky egg is something that can stick with boys and girls.
Yeah. Definitely. I always feel like, too, when I was a counselor and I would go into a classroom, I felt like I needed a really good hook to get students interested in talking about certain topics. So I think if you have, a creative story or you start off with kind of an interesting story, it helps to convey the message a little bit easier and gets people talking more, which is what as a counselor.
Exactly. Well, and then also talking about it in the context of an egg growing from the size of a pea to taking over the lunchroom, I think it helps probably breaks down a little bit of the barriers of a conversation and makes it a little bit easier to talk about things that are a little more difficult. And you can talk about Parker and that giant egg and not necessarily about them and their rotten egg thoughts. And then they can maybe find that connection and see a little bit of I don't know, I guess lower their defenses a little bit.
Right, definitely. I agree.
And one of the other things as I was reading the story, rereading the stories, you use a lot of really good language for development too. So not only did you write a story to teach wonderful skills and resilience, but then very much of good vocabulary development. The word peculiar definitely jumped off the page.
Thank you. I wasn't thinking about that, but thank you very much. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was, and then that's thinking about helping kids learn lessons and remember stories, even just talking about the vocabulary and thinking of that word peculiar. That is a word that is a kind of fun, quirky word. And you got to think about that word and you can talk about that word. And that can be a word that can also stick with them of like, oh yeah, what was that book that we read about peculiar and those rotten egg thoughts and everything. And it just, yeah, the vocabulary is outstanding too.
Thank you so much. Thanks.